Here's a question for everyone. Urban, suburban, rural, Missouri, Illinois. Do you feel safe where you live? Because while we can talk about crime stats and trends, when you get down to it, crime, like politics, is local. It's about you and your family, about your street and your neighborhood, and yes, it's about your police department. This isn't just about Ferguson tonight, but that has raised some issues that hit home no matter where you live. So tonight, do the cops have your back? Do you have theirs? Stay tuned.
And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned.
Well, this is certainly a time of waiting. What will the grand jury decide when it comes to the Michael Brown case? Tonight we are talking about more than that, though. When that decision comes, we will talk more about that then. However, we can't have this conversation without talking about Ferguson. Tonight we have the chief of the St. Louis Police Department here. We have representatives who've worked with the ACLU. We have community members. We also have experts. So let's start there with David Klinger with the University of Missouri St. Louis. In the criminology department there. As we said, we can't have this conversation without talking about the 2.5 months we've just been through. How have the events in Ferguson, as we refer to them, influenced policing? Have they already? Will they going forward?
I think so, and I think what happens in a situation like this is a local story gets nationalized. And I have friends in law enforcement literally on both coasts, and I've talked to them about what's going on. And the lessons that are still being learned in Ferguson are being disseminated. Issues in terms of how to deal better with community members, issues of how the police can better structure interactions with citizens to perhaps avoid situations from escalating where deadly force might be used. So yes, this is something that is definitely on the radar screen across the country in terms of law enforcement.
Is it on the radar screen? Is it more than that? I'm curious if this is something that we'll look back at as kind of a watershed moment.
I think the biggest thing in terms of a watershed moment at this point is likely body cameras. And there has been a move in law enforcement for the last few years. There have been some efforts around the country to evaluate the utility of body cameras in various law enforcement agencies. And I think that this is going to be the crest of the wave is going to break, and body cameras are probably going to be common throughout American law enforcement because of this. So there has been an effort, but I think this is really going to push the effort, and it's going to make it happen much more rapidly than it otherwise would have.
What does the law say about police shootings? This might be a time of learning for the community, too. These are a lot of issues that maybe people never talked about, never thought about.
Right. There's basically 3 levels that are going to govern the use of deadly force by the police. The first is going to be the federal Constitution. And what the court ruled in 1985 in a landmark case, Tennessee versus Garner, basically said police officers are allowed to shoot under 2 circumstances. To protect life, their lives, the life of another innocent, and then also to prevent the escape or affect the arrest of a violent felon who is fleeing from them. And so police officers, according to the U.S. Constitution, are allowed to shoot to stop violent felons from escaping, protect themselves and other innocents from great bodily injury or death. Then every state is going to have a law that permits officers to use deadly force basically around those same parameters. But certain states will say specifically, these are the violent felonies you're allowed to shoot for. Then individual police agencies will have a policy that is allowed to be more restrictive than the state law. And so, for example, a given police agency might say, we don't want you using deadly force to prevent the escape of someone if they're in a vehicle. Or if the only deadly instrument being presented to you is the vehicle, get out of the way instead of firing. So there's a variety of policies that are also going to govern police behavior. And those policies can vary from agency to agency, but they all have to be under the rubric of whatever the state law is in the state of the agency. And of course, nothing can violate the federal Constitution.
So that's a lot to think about in a moment of crisis.
Absolutely.
How are officers trained? How do they handle this?
Police officers are basically trained, first of all, in what the constitutional prescriptions are, then in the state law, and then in their individual agency police agency policy. And then what happens is they go out and they do what we call mock scenes, where police officers in the academy or in-service training are put through scenarios, and then the officer has to make a decision. Do I use deadly force? Do I not use deadly force? And then another thing is, in the classroom, in addition to being trained about what the law says, examples of cases will come up and say, here's what would constitute a deadly threat. This police officer in Los Angeles was involved in this, a police officer in New York, a police officer in Kansas City confronted an individual with a knife, a gun. We had the recent tragedy in New York where this crazy man, apparently a jihadi, attacked 4 New York City police officers, broke one guy's arm, hit another guy in the head, and these were all 4 rookies, and they had to kill him. So that's going to be something that's going to be on the training radar in terms of teaching police officers the types of things that could present a deadly threat that would justify the use of deadly force.
That's an interesting phrase there, because I've heard a lot of people ask, why don't they shoot to wound? It happens, that's popular culture in our media. That's what you see in the movies. What you have to kill them? What's the teaching?
The teaching is shoot to stop the threat. And the reason that we don't shoot to wound, 2 reasons. Number one is because if we shoot to wound, typically to an extremity, the odds of us hitting are far lower than if we aim to center mass, which is what police officers are trained to do. And people have to remember that every bullet that misses holds the potential to harm an innocent individual. And so that's the first reason. We don't want to get individuals injured who are completely innocent. The other thing is shooting someone in the arm or the leg isn't oftentimes going to stop the threat. So if I've got a gun pointed at you and you shoot me in my arm, I can still shoot you. You shoot me in the leg, I can still shoot you. The best thing, and this is tried, true, tested, and every court in the country agrees, every legislative body in the nation agrees, every police agency across the country agrees, police officers shoot to center mass, because if I aim for someone's torso and I miss by 3 or 4 inches, I'm still going to hit them. If I aim for an arm and miss by 3 or 4 inches, I can hit somebody behind, an innocent party. We don't want that.
So there's no department in the country, just to be clear, that says try to shoot him in the leg first.
That's correct.
And I'm not being flippant about
right.
that, but people ask that question.
However, what I will say is there are times and places when the time constraints are such that it is not a rush, where sometimes police officers will say, okay, under this circumstance, I can shoot a leg. Under this circumstance, maybe I can aim for an extremity. But that's not the default position. That is an unusual position.
Your thoughts on the state of police-community relations before we bring in the chief here?
They are rough right now, and one of the reasons they're rough, in my opinion, is that the community really doesn't understand what policing is all about. They have a very coarse understanding of policing, and so they tend to group all police officers as a monolith. They're the guys in blue, they're the gals in blue, as opposed to understanding that the people that they're looking at in uniform, they're human beings just as well. And so I think what people need to do is step away from this notion of the police and Officer Klinger, Officer Johnson, Officer Rosenfeld, whatever the case might be. Look at that individual as a human being, then you can create contact and talk about things, as opposed to having this notion that he or she, the officer, is a member of the other. We're all part of the same community. Some of us just wear uniforms for several years.
Of course, the folks who demonstrate would probably say the same about their group as well when it comes to blanketing them as a monolith, as you said.
Absolutely, and that's why on both sides of the equation we need to get past the notion that that person is of a particular kind and say that's a human being. How can I create some contact with that human being?
David Klinger, stay with us if you would. We're going to check social media, and when we come back, Chief Sam Dotson will join us. Chief Sam Dotson with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department is here with us now. And Chief, just to clarify a couple of things you've said publicly already. There was a shooting in the Shaw neighborhood that is still under investigation with Mr. Myers involving a police officer, and that is something that you've said before, and I assume it holds true tonight. You can't talk about while it's under investigation.
Right. It's still going on the investigative process, and when we're done, we're going to hand that investigation to the circuit attorney. After she has a chance to look at it, then everything that we can under the Sunshine Law we'll talk about.
And I do want to talk big picture with you, but we've got you here, and it would be wrong if I didn't ask you what a lot of people are, I think, asking themselves and asking us when we're out in the community, and that is they're worried about what might happen when the grand jury announces its decision, whatever that might be. What can you tell people about how things might go from your perspective?
What I can tell them is there are a lot of conversations going on between law enforcement and demonstrators to make sure that everybody has the right to express their First Amendment rights, that they can do so unimpeded as long as they obey the law. And we're asking that people come out and do that, but do it peacefully. So what I would tell people is that we're preparing, just as you would expect anybody to prepare. Law enforcement has to prepare for what could come. But it's not just preparing, it's about conversation, and it's about preparing the community and preparing the people that protest. There are meetings going on every day trying to find solutions, trying to find common ground, and trying to work. The narrative that started with the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson is still being written. And we have an ability still to impact that narrative and turn it into something positive. You talked about body cameras, talked about civilian review. A lot of things are in the conversation.
Are you worried?
I'm always worried. I think any police chief that you ask, are they worried? I worry every day about everything. I worry about violence in our community, community on community violence. I worry about officer-involved shootings. I worry about the protest. So I am. But what I do know is that the men and women of the police department and the community members can find common ground and they can work together. I think it's also important to note that in this civil disobedience, in these protests that have happened, nobody on the law enforcement has been seriously injured because of any act of a protester, and nobody that's been protesting has been seriously injured before because of law enforcement activities. I think that's tremendous considering the amount of time that we've covered. So we both have done a lot to make sure that everybody's safe.
Have the past 2.5 months or so changed your department, changed your policies in any way?
I think Dr. Klinger was absolutely right. Law enforcement, it was a watershed event. We are shaping what law enforcement is going to look like for generations. Open and transparent, body cameras, civilian review, all of those things are in conversation in a way they haven't been before. Just an example inside of our department, we formed a force investigative unit to look at officer-involved shootings in a different way with the help of Dr. Klinger, who's been a big advocate of this type of in-depth look at them. That's the model. So the narrative for law enforcement, the conversation for law enforcement, St. Louis, the St. Louis region, is shaping what law enforcement will look like for the country in the coming years.
Do people understand your business? Is there a breakdown there in the relationship between the police and the community when it comes to the things we've already discussed about how things can escalate or elevate to different uses of different amounts of force?
I think you had two questions there. Do people understand our business? I think the media, television, movies, a variety of things have made law enforcement, I call it the CSI effect, that we can do DNA, forensics, autopsies, toxicologies in 40 minutes with 3 commercial breaks. That's just not the reality. They're called investigations because they take a long time to get through all of the facts, to interview people multiple times, to recanvass. So I don't know if people understand really the complexity and the hands-on work that has to happen with that. And with the community, I think that we always have an opportunity to grow. I think we are doing a better job of it. Just an example, I took the command staff of the city department through implicit bias training just last week. We're going to Department of Justice training. So I'm trying to educate the department and the command structure on the new way to do business, and I hope the community realizes that. At the shooting of Michael Brown, what that was about is not what happened that day, but it's what happened in generations before. That the relationship with the community didn't overnight just go like this. What was we saw systemic failures of government, under service, under education, under employment. Law enforcement in a lot of communities became the face of government. So we are overcoming a lot of that. Do we have room to grow? Absolutely, 100%. Do we have a lot of work to do? Sure we do. But this was a wake-up call, that watershed event. We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I've gotten the sense that people feel, especially in an officer-involved deadly shooting, that the police, this is the community's feeling, that the police and the prosecutors as well kind of protect their own. Do you feel that? How do How do you answer that?
I think you have to look at the individual agency. I think you alluded to it a little bit. Each agency is different. And in an agency of 1,300 police officers, I believe we're professional. I believe that we do thorough investigations. We're open, we're transparent. So much to the point that we're taking this investigation and giving it to an independent third party to review. I work for the mayor of the city of St. Louis. I work for the people of the city of St. Louis. The prosecutor in St. Louis is elected by the people of St. Louis. They have to have confidence in the people that they elect. I haven't heard one comment about the circuit attorney's office not being objective in this case. While people question us, that's why we hand the report over. And in this case, even the U.S. attorney is going to take a look at it.
Are these common steps or are these extraordinary measures?
Both common and extraordinary. Common in the sense that many major police agencies have something akin to what the chief is talking about. And some places around the country have had this for a long time. Other agencies don't do the thorough type of investigation in terms of handing it over to another body for review. But that is the gold standard, an in-depth review, in-depth investigation by law enforcement that is then handed over to a prosecutor for review. Some places it goes always to a grand jury. It's fascinating to me that people are complaining that the Mike Brown case went to a grand jury, should have been done some other way. This is pro forma in many places because that way members of the community get to participate in the review. Other places what happens is it is either a circuit attorney or a state's attorney or a district attorney that has his or her underlings take a careful look, then make a recommendation to the prosecutor, then the prosecutor's office will issue a letter talking about why the shooting was either appropriate or inappropriate.
Can you help us understand the policy that we talked about earlier? We have the U.S. Constitution, the Missouri Constitution, and then the individual policy of a department on deadly force. Can you walk us through that a little bit more?
Sure. I believe we have a policy that's probably a little more restrictive, but certainly in line with other agencies around the country. We're allowed to use deadly force only in the apprehension of a serious felon where violence was used or the threat of violence was used to protect our lives or to protect the lives of others. We do not shoot at fleeing cars. We do not use deadly force for protecting property. A burglary, for example, a larceny from a vehicle, we do not use deadly force. So we have a policy that I would say is more on the restrictive side, but certainly in line with agencies around the country.
What do you need from the community?
I need partners. When we talk about, we're talking about officer-involved shooting now, but let's talk about crime. I need community members to stand with us, to go to the circuit attorney's office to say, let's issue charges on this, to go to the courts and stand in front of a judge and say, this person has terrorized our neighborhood. Law enforcement is a community effort. We get our empowerment from the community. If we don't have the community support, we can't do our job. So we are not an occupying force. We are there to support the community and to keep the community safe, but they have to stand side by side with us. If they don't, one leg of the stool falls and we all fail.
I know you talk about community policing. What does that really mean?
Yeah, community policing, and
does it mean different things to different departments? Or?
Well, and that's the unfortunate part, it does. But in ours, it's making that connection. It's doing the neighborhood ownership model, where we organize neighborhoods into being able to do neighborhood watches. We do court watch programs. We do problem properties, and we talked while we were waiting here about a residence that was a habitual problem on the street. Law enforcement along with the community got together to solve that problem. I now require our recruits to come out of the academy to spend 30 days walking foot beats so they get to know people in their beats, get to know people in their neighborhoods. We've become a society where everybody likes to tweet and text, and even people in the neighborhood say they don't know who lives on either side of them. We have to get back to that sense of community. Community policing is also a neighborhood policing itself. When we grew up, if I did something wrong, which, believe it or not, happened occasionally, the neighbors would grab me by the ear and walk me to my mom and say, look what little Sammy did. And there was a neighborhood accountability around that. Now, we don't see that. So community policing is about our interaction with the community's interaction with us, and the community's interaction with itself. You
mentioned recruits. Is it important to you that your recruits look like the people they are serving when it comes to the diversity, and what are you doing about that?
Absolutely. So we started an academy class at the beginning of October. Over 50% African American. We graduated a class at the end of August, over 50% African American. We've drawn a 6-hour circle around St. Louis and have gone to universities with high African American enrollments and done recruiting in those, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Truman, a variety of universities. So I do believe that our department should be reflective of the community that we serve, and we're committed to doing that. And the last classes, you've seen that commitment.
Chief Sam Dotson, Dr. Klinger, thank you both for your time. If you can, please stick around. We'd like to have you back at the end of the show. Right now, though, let's go to Anne Marie Berger, who actually took us to a neighborhood that has taken a very proactive approach to its public safety.
This is our last Public Security Forum meeting for the year.
Meetings like this happen in neighborhoods all across the St. Louis region. Residents and law enforcement coming together to discuss security and share information. This particular meeting is led by the Central West End Neighborhood Security Initiative. Jim White is the executive director.
The Central West End Neighborhood Security Initiative is a entity that was created in 2008 to oversee and manage the security plan for several of the special business districts within the Central West End neighborhood.
There are 7 Central West End special business districts, or special tax districts. And it was those residents and business owners that came together to form the NSI.
Still be somebody from them.
Jim Dwyer is a founding member of the Central West End North Special Business District.
So when you started this in 2008, where did the need come from to make this a more organized effort?
We were all operating independently, and there wasn't a forum for communicating and sharing ideas and best practices and inspiring one another, until the Central West End Association took a hold of it and said, let's create a body that will enable people to come together from each of these SBDs.
And that's how and why this neighborhood security initiative was born. It's funded by the 7 participating districts and operates around a $200,000 budget. It provides administrative support to the individual districts for their safety and security expenditures, evaluates crime data and trends, coordinates with the St. Louis Police Department's 5th District, and manages supplemental police patrols.
Each of the SBDs, special business districts, hire a security provider. And in the case of our area, it's the city's finest.
The premise of the business model is bike patrols, police mountain bike patrols.
Charles Betts is a retired St. Louis Metropolitan Police officer and owner of the city's finest, an approved secondary employer for city police officers. He explains that using real cops is what makes these supplemental patrols effective.
What we're doing out here effectively is law enforcement, and St. Louis City police officers, or any police officer, any police department, they're highly trained. And so to put a police officer out here, we have the training that's necessary to identify and deal with the criminal element when that's presented, or any type of situation that may present itself. We also have direct communication with on-duty police officers, and they have the ability to monitor the police department radio while we're patrolling. If you're wanting just the mere visibility, security officer may be beneficial. But if you're wanting actual enforcement and professional staff on the street that know how to handle these situations and deal with these situations all the time, you want a police officer there.
So how does getting cameras on buildings work in this neighborhood? You go to businesses?
So we identify areas where we want some coverage, and not necessarily to capture a specific crime, but
The Central West End has an operating budget to pay for supplemental patrols and security cameras. While that's unusual, White says neighborhood ownership is not. He says many neighborhoods, in addition to the Central West End, have adopted the neighborhood ownership model, a citizen-led program supported by the Circuit Attorney's Office, the Mayor's Office, and the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The idea is simple. Citizen involvement fights crime.
We're fortunate that we do have money to help staff and support our programs, but a lot of these other neighborhoods it's all powered and run by volunteers and people who have an interest and who are great advocates for the places that they live. And so that's the primary quality, I think, that you see in these neighborhood ownership model programs.
For Stay Tuned, I'm Anne Marie Berger.
We'll continue this conversation here in the studio with a new group of guests. Let me do some introductions here. Jim White from the Central West End Neighborhood Security Initiative. Also, John Chasnoff, previously with the ACLU here in St. Louis, but you most recently authored a report on surveillance cameras for the ACLU, some work you'd started while you were still there, also with the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, and Corey Stack from the East St. Louis Housing Authority. John, I'll just start with you. Tell us, I'm sorry, Cortez Slack, I apologize. John, tell us what you found, tell us what your report says, your findings on the cameras in St. Louis.
Yeah, so this was a multi-year study of the surveillance cameras, the street cameras that are around St. Louis. And what we found was that there are really a hodgepodge of networks that are forming, and there's a plan to integrate those cameras and spread that network citywide. But along the way, what we found was there was really a lack of policies to protect privacy and civil liberties concerns. Some people had policies in place that were fairly good. Other places had no policies whatsoever. And so along the way, we saw that there were abuses already developing and already having happened. And so we wanted to ask the city to slow down a little bit and examine this question for the cost and benefits of cameras, both in terms of finances, their effectiveness, and their civil liberties implications, and then move forward thoughtfully as we, if we're going to put a network together.
What's your number one concern? People might look at something like the Central West End NSI and say, look at all the benefits.
So I'm very concerned that it's an expensive program, that it might well be that it's not worth the cost, and that along the way we're violating people's privacy rights.
Have you thought about body cameras? We've heard that mentioned quite a bit tonight already.
Yeah, so a lot of the people who are interested in police accountability are pushing body cameras right now, and I agree with that they can be very effective. But again, there are privacy considerations with the cameras as well. We don't want a walking mobile government surveillance of people 24 hours as they walk around on the streets. We don't want cameras going into people's homes with a police officer who might be invited into your home, but then suddenly your contents of what you had for dinner are on display and open to sunshine requests. We don't want victims of crime who are traumatized necessarily to be on camera. So there are a lot of questions around the body cameras, and we have to protect privacy as well. And in both cases, with street cameras and body cameras, you have to worry about who has access, whether these are protected information that are shielded from the public, that the police have access when needed to solve crimes, but not in other cases. And so there are a lot of questions on the street and then behind the scenes with what happens to the data.
Could you do what you're doing without the cameras?
Well, we did do what we're doing without cameras for a while, and with limited success. So in January, in the Central West End, we had a subject who committed 2 armed robberies in our neighborhood, and then he committed 2 armed robberies in another adjoining neighborhood. Our cameras were able to get a license plate number of his vehicle, and that was instrumental in the police detectives' ability to identify and apprehend this guy. And this is a guy who got out in December for serving a 19-year sentence for armed robbery, and within less than a month, he was out victimizing other people. So that's when John talks about the expense, that's the return on our investment that we're getting. We're able to provide the police department with what they need to accurately and successfully investigate.
You get any pushback
crimes.
from the folks in the neighborhood or the businesses when it comes to the things John's talking about in terms of their privacy?
No, I have not had any resident come up to me, and I've been speaking about cameras in the Central West End for over 2 years now, and my experience has been I have not had a resident come up to me and voice concerns over privacy issues that the cameras might create.
Tell us a little bit about the work you're doing, Cortez.
Last year, we made a substantial investment in installing new cameras in our high-rise buildings in public housing. We have 6 high-rise buildings. We saw instant success after those cameras came live. I mean, we were able to apprehend a burglary suspect the day after that's trying to break into an office space. I was able to sit in my office across town, view this happening, get a description of them. We get the police there, and the suspect was apprehended right after that. You know, so It's been beneficial. It's helped us out a lot as far as what we need to review. It's important to know that cameras can tell you who, what, when, where, and how. You know, it cannot, you won't see everything. And it's a misconception that if you hang a camera there, it should have captured everything, you know, but that's not the case. You know, sometimes that you're out of the camera view and things of that nature there, but I spent 17 years in camera works in casinos, an industry that spent millions on security and cameras, but even with that aspect, you couldn't cover the entire property.
Do they have any sort of preventative effect? Does the word get out that they're there?
My experience is that it can deter some. But I think an individual who wants to commit a crime is going to commit that crime. And you have to put that piece of the puzzle together to be able to go back and ascertain, like I said before, who, what, when, where, how, the description, and then you work from that point there.
Does that worry you when I say something like preventative aspect of a camera?
Well, it does. When you look at the studies, people can bring to the table anecdotes of successes with cameras, but when you look at the studies, they really haven't been that effective in fighting crime or in preventing crime. So, for instance, the one study we have here in St. Louis is around the 21st Ward cameras, and folks at UMSL looked at the installation of those cameras and the crime rates before and after, and what they found was that there was a fairly substantial drop right after the cameras were put in place, but within a 6-month period, the crime started to go back up. And in the end, there was a moderate effect on property crime, but almost no effect at all on violent crime, which is one of our major concerns in the city right now.
Of course, it's not all just cameras. In the Central West Indian and other neighborhoods, you have associations that chip in and pay for extra officers. Is that something that plays a big role in the security of a neighborhood, and is that the way it should be?
Yes, especially in our neighborhood. And the added security patrols are just one of the components of a larger security approach for our neighborhood. So they're very effective. The officers are on bikes. They're very engaging with the community, and the residents really respond well to that.
A lot of neighborhoods have associations that get involved, but of course not every neighborhood is created equal. Is there a disparity in the supplemental elements of patrols in neighborhoods?
Well, that's one of my concerns, is that really we want the government police department to be doing its job and providing equal protection for everyone. And when you have a situation where some neighborhoods are able to afford extra protection, then you get unequal treatment. And I think there also becomes questions about unequal influence. So, for instance, one of the things we found is that the Downtown Partnership chips in to pay for St. Louis police officers on bikes downtown. But so if they're paying for the police, are the business interests getting extra protection and some of the other people downtown aren't getting the same kind of treatment? So those are the questions that come up when you have these supplemental forces.
We made a substantial investment also in hiring a security team. When I came on board in East St. Louis, the officers were just understaffed and they just couldn't keep up with the calls. It's no fault of their own, but crime rate was up and there was issues in public housing, as you would know. So we got together and we had to form a security force, and they were trained, a well-trained security force as far as in adding an element to this cameras. Now you have a patrol force that's proactively patrolling, which is very important. And my team, I require them to do community policing as well. Get out of the cars, talk to our residents, you know, get to know what's going on, find that common ground, and people will talk to you.
I apologize, I'm a little bit of audio trouble while we get that worked out. Let's take a look at a report from Jim Kircher, who went to work some communities where the police and the community are working together to build these relationships we're talking about.
We're going to make a turn here, head towards the cafeteria.
It takes a certain kind of person to be a cop. It takes a certain kind of cop to be a school resource officer.
Of course.
St. Louis County Officer William Munson is stationed at Hazelwood Central High School. He's here partly for safety and security. He does carry a gun. But he's also here to deal with the kids, talking, listening, and when necessary, trying to straighten them out.
I mean, of course, you're going to get the good with the bad, bad with the good. But being able to pull that student in my office or in the hallway and deal with that critical issue that they're dealing with and coming to some type of resolution is satisfying.
He admits that he first took this job partly because of the regular hours, Monday through Friday, day shift, weekends off, but it grew on him.
And when I had a couple of students say, Officer Munson, thank you for what you did. You know, it was because of our conversation, because of what you told me, how to go about something. Here's my end results. And that was huge.
Has the conversation changed since Mike Brown and Ferguson?
Actually, what's so unique about since post-Ferguson, it has not changed. Actually, I've had students approach me, small numbers. Everything has been positive, but the questions have been about, you know, Officer Munson, did you have to go down to Ferguson? Were you on West Florissant doing all? They was more concerned, actually, about my well-being than any negative approach to it.
And he was up on West Florissant along with other county officers during the protests. And perhaps as clearly as anybody could see the importance of building bridges between cops and community.
We're missing it. Everybody's missing it. We need to sit down at a round table. We need to start doing it. We don't know what the community wants. The community don't know what we want. You need to come out to the town hall meetings, to the neighborhood watch meetings, and address the concerns.
Go around the corner and call 911 and give a description if that's happening, okay?
This is just the kind of thing he's talking about. It's a regular police community forum in University City. It's not crisis response or damage control. It's just city officials listening, explaining, and responding to, well, to whatever.
And seriously, it's become quite disgusting. And
stray cats, loud motorcycles, fallen trees, panhandlers in the loop, and car break-ins.
Yes, the larcenies from autos are on the rise. They will break that one door. But we instill in our neighbors that they have to be our eyes and ears. And we look at them as an extension of the police department. Unlicensed motorcycle?
No, it's noise. It's the noise level.
You never can just have like one event or one meeting. You have to keep it going, you know, on a regular basis, and you engage people. And so we're always doing something to make people want to be a part of us, and they feel comfortable and safe.
For Stay Tuned, I'm Jim Kircher.
We're joined by Richard Rosenfeld from the University of Missouri St. Louis, again from the criminology department. Something that Jim mentioned when he got back from that report was a lot of the resources that you just saw in that piece were present in Ferguson too.
Yeah.
What gives?
I think it's important to understand that there was no way to predict that incident in Ferguson. That incident could have occurred in many, many different places, in communities somewhat like Ferguson and communities not like Ferguson. So while we are certainly legitimately concerned about our local community and what's happened there, there's nothing, I would argue, there's nothing specific about Ferguson that distinguishes it from hundreds or thousands of communities across the country in which the same kind of event and the same kind of response might have occurred.
Which a demonstrator might agree with you on, saying that this is a larger issue that's bubbled up here.
There's no question.
Talk to me about relations. Let's take the St. Louis Police Department, for instance. Do you characterize how you see, when you study the department, I know you work with the department closely and do a lot of research, are they interacting with their community?
Oh, sure. Police interact with the community every single day. Every time an officer has an encounter, and I don't mean that negatively, interacts with a citizen, police-community relations are occurring on the ground. I think sometimes what gets lost is when we're in the midst of community unrest over tragic shootings. We tend to think that police-community relations only involve relationships between protesters and their leaders and the police, as all of that gets portrayed in the media, when in fact police-community relations happen in the way I just mentioned every day, individual officer, individual citizen, and in the dozens to hundreds of meetings that police agencies all over this area hold with their citizens. I would argue that's where real police-community relations get built. I'm not suggesting that the unease and unrest associated with the protest activity and protesters' relationship with the police is unimportant. Certainly it's important. But day in, day out, outside of protests of tragic events, Police are meeting with citizens in meetings. It's often over very, very prosaic, not very exciting events, such as disorder on the streets, kids being out after curfew, cars being broken into, which is an important event, but not the most serious crime. That's where police-community relations really get built up.
So is there a tension at all between the community's needs and an individual's rights? I'm thinking of the same people that might attend these meetings and are doing what the police want them to do, which is call them if they see something suspicious.
Right.
You have a guy walking in on your street. Is he looking for the right address, or is he casing a house? And then they call the police stop him. Is there a tension there in the individual's rights and the community's needs?
There can be a tension. I think a great deal depends on the way both the officer and the individual on the street approach the situation. The officer, I think there's nothing wrong with a citizen calling the police and saying, for example, there's a young man on the street, I think he's out after curfew, something like that. Now he's just walking down the street. The officer responds, introduces himself to the individual on the street. I think officers should always present a card when they meet someone. Says, I'm Officer Brown, I'm here, I'm going to be around the neighborhood. Anything I can do for you, you know, you're looking for someone, you're looking for some, those kinds of questions are perfectly appropriate. And the person on the street, I think, if the officer approaches the individual in that way, should, you know, and certainly the individual need not say anything. Better for community relations if the individual were to simply tell the officer what he was doing, and that interaction would have ended peacefully, and that's another little part of police-community relations that work well. If officers come on too tough, too gruffly, as if someone has committed a crime when there's no evidence that's happened yet, and the individual responds in kind, then you get problems.
Richard Rosenfeld, stick around for us. I want you to join us at the end of the show here, but right now we want to get your voice in this conversation. Let's go back to social media. Let's talk to some ladies in the community who are thinking about the very issues we are talking about tonight, and also from the Circuit Attorney's Office, but also with the community as well. Rachel Smith from the Circuit Attorney's Office, Chris Kleindest with Left Bank Books, and Rita Ford, Gravois Park Neighborhood Association. Chris, I'll start with you. We just kind of talked about a tension there. Tell me about, are there any tensions as a business owner, your parent? I'm just curious if how you're feeling.
Well, I have a lot of mixed feelings. I was very brokenhearted at what happened in Ferguson and some of the subsequent police shootings. I also have a business. I feel like I have several levels of protection and concern. So I have, number one, my son, who is brown-skinned and 17 and about to get a driver's license. And when I see him go out the door every day, I have very real concerns that I won't see him come back. He's a good kid, but he gets, you know, he opens doors for old ladies. But he gets like followed in Target by security. So I have that, that's number one. And number two, I've got this business. It's a street front business. I think anybody who has a business on a street front would be delusional if they weren't concerned about stuff that's happening right now. But by and large, I think a lot of people you've talked to tonight have laid out a lot of the reasons why you know, things are being done. We don't have to get hysterical. I am concerned for the protection of my property, of course, but I have a staff that I worry about, and I have customers. And the thing about it is, My customers are, I want them to be able to come to my store and not be stopped for no reason on their way there. I have my manager, who's African American and in her 20s, gets stopped by the police once a month. I am 61. I have never been stopped by the police. So these are realities, and these are my people, and I want all of them to be safe, and I want all of them to feel welcome in my neighborhood and in my business. I feel very good about what's going on with the Neighborhood Security Initiative overall in the Central West End. I think the best thing is that community-oriented policing. I think that getting to know everyone, knowing the officers' names, the officers knowing the neighborhood they're working in, very healthy way to do things. But we definitely have to keep that dialogue open.
Rita, what's your relationship, what's your neighborhood's relationship with your police department?
I'm in the 3rd District Police Department over there, and I've been in my neighborhood for 25 years. I've been active in the neighborhood since 1999, and I appreciate what she just said, her son being brown-skinned. I have never been stopped by a police officer. I work very close with the police officers. We have several different transfers and different officers, captains, chiefs, what have you. I've always worked very closely with them, not only myself. I think I could speak very much so for the entire neighborhood, not only my neighborhood, the connecting neighborhoods such as Dutchtown, Marine Villa, Benton Park West. Now, I like to say this, she made a point about, if you don't mind, she made a point about him being brown-skinned and how he's stopped when he goes into Target. When I come home, I am not worried about the police officer stopping me. I'm worried about the brown-skinned guy stopping me. And that's an issue that I don't think a lot of us have addressed, with the protesters even. The senator, Al Sharpton, where were all these people the other day? We had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old shot down on the street in an African-American neighborhood. There have been at least 112 murders in the city of St. Louis. 98 are black-on-black crime. So where are these people when it's time to really get angry? I don't understand it. Because we, as a race of people, and nobody wants to point the finger, and like I said, I am not afraid of the police. I feel comfortable with the police. I'm afraid of my own African brothers and sisters, more so than I am the police. So I'm just the opposite, so to speak, because I don't think he's going to beat me down or shoot me. I'm looking for little, I can't say that, but anyway, I'm just looking, keeping my eye open, and I just believe truly in my heart that the police, I think they have our backs, and I think we have their backs in the neighborhood. I have actually come to a point when Captain Deba was in our captain. I actually stopped and I saw a confrontation going on with 2 African-American guys and a police officer. I backed up.
Rachel, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to know about the neighborhood ownership model. Break that down for us more. That's another term that could kind of get lost in all of this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But what does that mean?
Well, I think Rita's neighborhood's a prime example of that concept of neighborhood ownership. The neighborhood ownership model is really a phrase used to talk about partnership and credible relationships between the police, the community, and the criminal justice system, the prosecutor here, the city of St. Louis. The idea is to take the concepts that have been bandied about community policing, community prosecution, and really help put this community in the driver's seat. Because the system works when there are credible relationships between the police and the people they serve, and the prosecutors and the people they serve. If the police try to go it alone and solve the problem, they're seen as sort of an invading force. If the prosecutors just operate in the vacuum of the courthouse, they're seen as obtaining results that are biased. The idea of the neighborhood ownership model is that the citizens are the ones who move the process forward. The citizens work in partnership with each other first to patrol their streets in sort of a citizens on patrol. They work in partnership with each other to support victims of crime from their own community, trained by my office on how to support victims who are their neighbors. And then the citizens work to shape and give information to the court system about how a particular type of crime affects their community.
It sounds great. How do you make it happen?
Well, it's not a one agency make it happen. In fact, it's really not, hi, I'm the government, I'm here to help you. It's really about the citizens turning it around and saying, you know what, this is my system, and if I want results, good results out, I have to put something into it. I have to put in the effort to have a good relationship with the police. And if they're not behaving in the way I want, I have to have a relationship with them so that I can hold them accountable in a way that leaves us whole and doesn't set it up so that we're enemies. It's so that the citizens have a credible relationship with the prosecutor, so that if something's going on in their community, that the prosecutors understand that in the context of that community, not just as a data point or a case on a criminal justice assembly line. And so that the community also comes in and it presents facts to the court, in court, on a court watch program or in an advocacy situation where they help the judges see a matter in context on how a burglary in Holly Hills may affect that community differently than, say, a burglary in Graveway Park. And so it's really about the citizens taking ownership of their system, not necessarily sitting back and waiting for the police or the prosecutors or the courts to solve their crime problems for them.
Do you see this in your neighborhood?
This particular program?
I mean, in terms of the citizens, this is a lot of engagement. Do either of you see this?
We invented it. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they started coming to court in 1999.
Since 1999, we started this program back then. Nationally recognized by the U.S. Justice Department in 2005. So we've been doing excellent with this program, and we have reached out to other neighborhoods, Marineville, other neighborhoods. We'll go down and support other neighborhoods in return. And to show you that these neighborhoods have no fences, very quickly, I'll give you a very good example. It's one of the reasons why citizens need to band together. We had a woman, they have no fences here, that lived in Graveway Park. She was killed 2 blocks away, which is Dutchtown. Her murderer was captured in Benton Park West. So there is no fences. We're all in this thing together, and you have to really work together. We work very closely with Circuit Attorney's Office, the police department.
And we're all in it together. It's a good place to leave it for this moment. We've got to go back online to see what you're saying. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere.
Oh, don't go anywhere.
You're fine. Come on in here. Chief, it struck me that Richard was talking about officers leading with a business card. Is that something that officers have the time or the training or the energy to do?
Well, we were just talking about that in the room behind. Hey, I want them to be focused on the issue that's at hand and to deal with that. And then as they're leaving the interaction, leaving something behind, the contact information, identifying themselves, I'm fine with. But I want them focused on what's happening in front of them and not worried, where's my business card?
What else have you heard here tonight that has sparked the wheels a little bit? I'm curious if you feel like we're off base in this conversation from the perspective of someone who has done the job and is leading men and women doing the job.
A couple of things. I like to hear that what we're doing is reaching into the community and having an effect. And even from John, technology is a great tool. We have to find the right space for it. I think cameras do have their role if they're monitored, if they're in real time. Cameras for the sake of cameras, I probably agree with you, are not the right thing. And from Jim, each neighborhood has its own unique needs, and I'd like to be able to put more resources into every neighborhood. But when groups come together like that, when neighborhoods have those special taxing districts, they actually help us do our job and free up resources that might be in that neighborhood or need more attention to go to other places that do need more attention. So all of these are good ideas, but they're all things that we're talking about. We just need to keep talking about.
John, same question to you, because I know you talk a lot about this with your colleagues. What are we missing tonight that you feel like the community should know, or maybe the community is talking about and the people at this table should know?
Well, I think the thing that was brought up a little bit, but we haven't delved into it, is the racial disparities in policing, and I think that's really one of the main causes of friction in police-community relations. So when you look at a study that the ACLU did on marijuana possession, the city had a disparity of 18-to-1 where blacks are more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites, even though use of the drug is similar in both communities. So I think a lot of the issues that have been raised by Ferguson have to do with racial disparities, implicit bias in policing, and I think that's one of the areas we really have to work on.
Richard, it's hard to recruit African Americans, yes or no, to the work of police?
I think we overstate the difficulty of recruiting African Americans. The chief mentioned earlier the last 2 academy classes in the city are more than 50% African American. It takes recruitment efforts, and as the city's been doing. I frankly don't think there's any excuse for why county municipalities, I live in North County, why county municipalities that are serving very diverse communities are largely white. I don't think it's necessary.
Cortez, we have about a minute left. What could the Missouri side of the river learn from your side of the river?
I think it's all about rapport. I think a Caucasian or a Caucasian officer could come into the community and have that common bond or that rapport with an individual just by maybe it's kids, maybe each school. Find that goal or that commonality between the two and build a rapport. You know, it's simple to do. I don't think it's all black and white. You know, it's just people.
That might be a good place to leave it right there. I would like to invite you all to stick around for just a little bit. We'll continue this conversation online, staytuned.9net.org, and we'll ask a few more questions of each other. But for now, on air, we'll just sign off and say, stay tuned. Until next time. Do you live and work in the same neighborhood? So, or do you see a difference in your 2 neighborhoods at all? Tell me where you, because your shop is in the West End. Mm-hmm. And what neighborhood do you live in? And do you see much difference in the way things work? I'm thinking about all of the extra supplemental patrols we've talked about in the West End.
Well, this West End seems very together about this stuff and very on top of it. And I think maybe one of the reasons is because of the commercial aspect of it and
hospitals.
Yeah, and there's
school.
Everybody is pretty willing to get involved. I know on the street front, you know, the businesses we're pretty responsive, and we have good, you know, email connections. We hear what's going on. We stay up on stuff. Holly Hills is a residential neighborhood by and large, and it's similar in some ways because we are sort of edged. It's like the economic and even racial, there's divides kind of street to street a little bit, but it's a very Catholic neighborhood, and it's a very close-knit neighborhood by and large. So in a certain way, it really kind of takes care of itself pretty well, just in a different way than the West End does.
So we know, not in your department, but throughout the response to Ferguson, we've seen a couple of officers early on that were suspended for some things they said or actions they took during the unrest. But I've also seen a lot of video of individuals, a small percentage, I would argue, by what I've seen and what I've watched online, but we've seen some individuals who are really been pretty aggressive to some of your officers, to the point where they've kind of been chased, for lack of a better word, cornered back into their vehicles, and their vehicles are hit and things of that nature. Just curious what you're telling your officers going forward, and how are they holding up? Nobody probably asks that too often.
Well, the first thing is I want to say I could not be more proud of the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department and the men and women of law enforcement as a whole. These have been unprecedented times. Their professionalism, their restraint, you saw in the video, it's stressful. It is. When somebody is standing in your face, inches away from your face, and talking about your wife or your children and the things that are going to do to your children, I ask where the humanity is in that conversation sometime. But it's important to remember that they've always acted professionally. Nobody has been injured on either side of the equation during this entire time. That's because of the professionalism, I believe, that the law enforcement has shown. So it's taking a toll. It absolutely is, but I think it's human nature. We've offered counseling. We've had counselors come to the area police stations to talk to the officers. We've done events for family to try and make sure that they're cohesive, but we still have a little bit of ways to go.
Going forward, we started the show by saying this was kind of a watershed moment. Where do you see policing in the next 5 to 10 years in our region here or across the country?
I think there's a few things to sort of wrap up with some of these comments. Number one, I do think technology is going to shift in terms of body cameras. And one of the things we were talking about off camera was what are the parameters? For example, when I was a young police officer, I interrupted 2 rapes in progress. And so I can only imagine if we would have gone in and had body cameras, what do we do with this situation where we've got a naked woman who's being raped? She has a privacy right. And so we have to think about those types of things, and we have to think about these things thoroughly. We have to think about these things in terms of the humanity, not just the bureaucracy of it, but the humanity of it. I think another issue is, I agree with Rick, that we do need to increase the level of minority representation in this area in terms of law enforcement. But I also agree with the comment from my friend across the river who's saying white police officers can be effective in minority communities. When I was a young cop in Los Angeles, I worked all black neighborhoods essentially for the first year and a half on the street. And it took a little bit of work, but I was able to earn the trust. And so I think sometimes we think too much about black-white. And if we think about human to human, which is what we should always be driving for, then we will be able to start to get some of these things taken care of. And I do think that there will be a meeting where technology will assist with this. Because what's going to happen, quite frankly, when every single police shooting, well, not every single one, but the vast, vast majority come out on video, the vast, vast majority of the time the police officer is behaving appropriately. And I think people will say, now wait a second, this is what we call in the business a good shooting, so we don't need to get upset about it. There's enough bad police work out there that has been documented, and we need to focus on the bad police work instead of creating issues about situations where we don't know whether it was bad police work or not yet. And so I think technology is going to assist with that, and it will also assist with people understanding the dynamics of what goes on when a police officer has to make this choice. It's not a choice they want to make, but sometimes they have to. And if people can actually see this played out in real time, I think they'll be able to have more sympathy for the job of police officers, understand why that decision was made, and say, this was a good shooting. And what we'll also do, it'll capture the bad shootings, and it'll be not black and white per se, but it'll be much more clear about what went wrong, and then the agency can take the appropriate action. The chief can fire the officer, the prosecutors can prosecute the officer, whatever the case might be.
One issue that we should keep on the table is crime. The vast majority of the complaints the police receive, not simply in the St. Louis region, everywhere, is where are you when we need you? This neighborhood has problems. Sometimes it's a low serious crime neighborhood. The problems are disorder and that sort of thing. Sometimes they're much more serious crimes, but the chief complaint police get is, why aren't you here addressing our crime problems? One of the ironies, if that's the word, about the current situation is that as the police prepare for a grand jury decision, as the police have had to address protest activity, all of which is necessary activity, it takes them off their ordinary day-to-day crime-reducing, crime-fighting functions. And that's something I think the community needs to realize. That's no excuse or no argument against protest. But, you know, policing is a world like all the other worlds we live in of finite resources. And if you're moving police over in this area, you've got fewer police to deal with fundamental problems that people normally complain about when they don't see the police around in their neighborhood.
Local, as we said.
Yes.
One of the things I wanted to talk about briefly with cameras, and your report didn't talk about it, but civil liberties, let's talk about the value that video evidence provides the police as opposed to eyewitness video and the inaccuracies that we've seen over the years play out in criminal courts. I mean, it's invaluable to have a camera video evidence that can be analyzed to be used to build a case. Both prosecutors, I think, would agree, has more credibility and more weight than eyewitness testimony. And one other subtlety about your report was, you know, we use terms like mass surveillance, and that really gets people squirming in their seat. As cameras relate to the Central West End, we have a very passive system. We have cameras put up in strategic locations, hoping to capture good, actionable intelligence that we can pass on to the police if there is an event. But when I hear the term surveillance, it's more of an action where somebody's watching and acting on what they're seeing immediately. And then Cortez brought that up, where actually that surveillance type of approach worked. And it generated an immediate response, which resulted in an arrest. The funding for that, though, is just exorbitant, and I don't know how communities like ours can afford that. But what we have and what we can afford is providing us with great results, and we're looking at expanding.
We're almost out of time. I'll give you the last word, John. We have a few comments on cameras here.
Well, when we talk about mass surveillance, the city is envisioning a network that will cover the entire city. So when you have a network like that, you're able, through facial recognition and other software, to track people as they move around the city. And that's why I think the phrase mass surveillance is important. Nobody wants to be tracked as they move from a political rally to their doctor's office to their place of worship. Nobody wants to be tracked so that their daily schedule is known to everyone in terms of, you know, if this is Sunshine Request accessible information, then burglars can sunshine what your route is to work every day and when you leave the house and when you come home. Those are the types of concerns that we are raising when we talk about mass surveillance and the creation of a network.
A lot to be.